The Invention of Morel by Adolfo Bioy Casares, continued. Page 78. Then I resumed my efforts, moving to the other parts of the wall. Chips fell, and when larger pieces of the wall began to come down, I kept on pounding, bleary-eyed with an urgency that was far greater than the size of an iron bar, until the resistance of the will, which seemed unaffected by the force of my repeated pounding, pushed me into the floor frantic and exhausted. First I saw, then I touched, the pieces of masonry. They were smooth on one side, harsh earthly on the other. Then in a vision so lucid it seemed ephemeral and supernatural, my eyes saw the blue continuity of the tile, the undamaged, and the whole wall, the closed room. I pounded some more. In some places of the wall broke off, but they did not reveal any sort of cavity. In fact, in the twinkling of an eye, the wall was perfect again, achieving that invulnerable hardness I had already observed in the place where I had made the original opening. I shouted, "Help!" I lunged at the wall several times and it knocked me down. I had an imbecilic attack of tears. I was overcome by the horror of being in an enchanted place and by the confused realization that its vengeful magic was effective in spite of my disbelief. Harassed by the terrible blue walls, I looked up at the skylight. I saw first, without understanding, and then, with fear, a cedar branch split apart and become two branches. Then two branches were fused, as docile as ghosts, to become one branch again. I said out loud, or thought very clearly, I shall never be able to get out. I am in an enchanted place. But then I felt ashamed, like a person who has carried a joke too far, and I understood. These walls, like Faustine, Morel, the fish in the aquarium, one of the suns and one of the moons, the book by Bellador, or projections of the machines, they coincide with the walls made by the masons. They are the same walls taken by the machines and then projected on themselves. Where I have broken or removed the first wall, the projected one remains. Since it is a projection, nothing can pierce or eliminate it as long as the motors are running. If I destroy the first wall, the machine wall will be open when the motors stop running. It will no longer be a room, but the corner of a room. But when the motors begin again, the wall will reappear, and it will be impenetrable. Morel must have planted the double wall protection to keep anyone from reaching the machines that control this immortality, but his study of the tides was deficient. It was probably made during a different solar period, and he thought that the power plant would function without any interruptions. Surely he is the one who invented the famous disease that up until now has protected the island very well. My problem is to discover a way to stop the green motors. Perhaps I can find the switch that disconnects them. It took me only one day to learn to operate the light plant and the water pump. I think I shall be able to leave this place. The skylight is, or will be, my salvation because I shall not resign myself to die of hunger in a state of utter desperation, paying my respects to those I leave behind, as did the Japanese sailor who, with virtuous and bureaucratic agony, faced asphyxiation in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. The letter he wrote was found in the submarine and printed in the paper. As he awaited death, he saluted the emperor, the ministers, and, in hierarchical order, all the admirals he had time to enumerate. He added comments like, "Now I am bleeding from the nose," or "I feel as if my eardrums have broken." While writing these details, I had the sensation of living through that experience. I hope I shall not end as he did. The horrors of the day are written down in my diary. I have filled many pages. Now it seems futile to try to find inevitable analogies with dying men who make plans for long futures, or who see at the instant of drowning a detailed picture of their whole life before them. The final moment must be rapid, confused. We are always so far removed from death that we cannot imagine the shadows that must becloud it. Now I shall stop writing in order to concentrate serenely on finding the way to stop these motors. Then the breach will open again as if by magic, and I shall be outside. I have not yet been successful in my attempt to stop the motors. My head is aching. Ridiculous attacks of nerves, which I quickly control, rouse me from a progressive drowsiness. I have the impression, undoubtedly illusory, that if I could receive a little fresh air from the outside, I would soon be able to solve these problems. I have tried to break the skylight like everything else. It is invulnerable. I keep telling myself that the trouble does not issue from my lethargy or from the lack of air. These motors must be very different from all the others. It seems logical to suppose that Morel designed them so that no one who came to this island would be able to understand them. But the difficulty in running the green motors must stem from their basic differences from the other motors. As I do not understand any of them, this greater difficulty disappears. Morel's eternity depends on the continued functioning of the motors. I can suppose that they are very solid. Therefore, I must control my impulse to break them into pieces. That would only tire me out and use up the air. Writing helps me to control myself. And what if Morel had thought to photograph the motors? Finally, my fear of death freed me from the irrational belief that I was incompetent. I might have seen the motors through a magnifying glass. They ceased to be a meaningless conglomeration of iron and steel. They had forms and arrangements that permitted me to understand their purpose. I disconnected them. I went outside. In the machine room, in addition to the water pump and the light plant, which I had already mentioned, I recognized a network of power cables connected to the mill wheel in the lowlands. B, an assortment of stationary receivers, recorders, and projectors connected to other strategically placed machines that operate throughout the whole island. 3 portable machines, receivers, recorders, and projectors for special showings. Inside of what I had taken for the most important engine, instead it was only a box of tools, I found some incomplete plans that were hard to understand and gave me a dubious assistance. I did not acquire that insight until I had conquered my previous state of mind. Desperation, number 1. Number 2, the feeling that I was playing a dual role, that of an actor and a spectator. I was obsessed with the idea that I was in a play, awaiting asphyxiation in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. That state of mind lasted too long, and when I came out of the room, night had fallen and it was too dark to look for edible roots. First, I turned on the portable receivers and projectors, the ones for special showings. I focused on flowers, leaves, flies, frogs. I had the thrill of seeing them reproduced in their exact likeness. Then I committed the imprudence. I put my left hand in front of the receiver. I turned on the projector, and my hand appeared just like my hand, making the lazy movements it made when I photographed it. Now it is like any other object in the museum. I'm keeping the projector on so that the hand will not disappear. The sight of it is not unpleasant, but rather unusual. In a story, that hand would be a terrible threat for the protagonist. In reality, what harm can it do? The vegetable transmitters, leaves, flowers, died after 5 or 6 hours. The frogs after 15. The copies survive, they are incorruptible. I do not know which files are real and which ones are artificial. Perhaps the leaves and flowers died because they needed water. I did not give any food to the frogs, they must have suffered from the unfamiliar surroundings too. I suspect that the effects on my hand are the result of my fear of the machine, not of the machine itself. I have a steady, faint, burning sensation. Some of my skin has fallen off. Last night I slept fitfully. I imagined horrible changes in my hand. I dreamt that I scratched it, that I broke it into pieces easily. That must have been how I heard it. Another day will be intolerable. First, I was curious about a paragraph from Morel's speech. Then I was quite amused, thinking I had made a discovery. I'm not sure how that discovery led to this other one, which is judicious, ominous. I shall not kill myself immediately. When I'm most lucid, I tend to postpone my death for one more day, to remain as proof of an amazing combination of ineptitude and enthusiasm, or despair. Perhaps writing down my idea will make it lose its force. Here is the part of Morel's speech that I found unusual. You must forgive me for this rather tedious, unpleasant incident. Why unpleasant? Because they were going to be told that they had been photographed in a new way without having been warned beforehand? And naturally, the knowledge that a week of one's life with every detail has been recorded forever, when that knowledge was imparted after the fact, would be a shock. I also thought one of these persons must have a dreadful secret. Morel is either trying to find it out or planning to reveal it. And then I happened to remember that some people are afraid of having their images reproduced because they believe that their souls will be transferred to the images and they will die. The thought that Morel had experienced misgivings because he had photographed his friends without their consent amused me. Apparently, that ancient fear still survived in the mind of my learned contemporary. I read the sentence again. You must forgive me for this rather tedious and pleasant incident. We shall try to forget it. What did he mean? That they would soon overlook it, or that they would no longer be able to remember it? The argument with Stover was terrible. Stover's suspicions are the same as mine. I don't know how I could have been so slow to understand. Another thing, the theory that the images have souls seems to demand as a basic condition that the transmitters lose theirs when they are photographed by the machines. As Morel himself says, the theory that images have souls seems to be confirmed by the effects of my machine on persons, animals, and vegetables used as transmitters. A person who would make this statement to his victims must have a very overbearing and audacious conscience, which would be confused with the lack of conscience. But such a monstrosity seems to be in keeping with the man who, following his own idea, organizes a collective death and determines of his own accord the common destiny of all his friends. What was his purpose? To use this rendezvous with his friends to create a kind of private paradise? Or was there some other reason that I have not yet been able to fathom? And if so, it very possibly may not interest me. Now I believe I can identify the dead crew members of the ship that was sunk by the cruiser Namora. Morel used his own death and the death of his friends to confirm the rumors about the disease on the island. Morel spread these rumors to protect his machinery, his immortality. But all this, which I can now view rationally, means that Faustine is dead, that Faustine lives only in this image for which I do not exist. Then life is intolerable for me. How can I keep on living in the torment of seeming to be with Faustine when she is really so far away? Where can I find her? Away from this island, Faustine is lost with the gestures and the dreams of an alien past. On one of my first pages, I said, I have the uncomfortable sensation that this paper is changing into a will. If I must resign myself to that, I shall try to make statements that can be verified, so that no one, knowing that I was accused of duplicity, will doubt that I was condemned unjustly. I shall adopt the motto of Leonardo, ostinato rigore, as my own. and endeavor to live up to it. Note, does not appear at the beginning of the manuscript. Is this omission due to the loss of memory? There is no way to answer that question, and so as in every doubtful place, we have been faithful to the original. Editor's note. Although I am doomed to misery, I shall never forget that motto. I shall complete my diary by correcting mistakes and by explaining things I did not understand before. That will be my way of bridging the gap between the ideal of accuracy and my original narration. The Tides. I read the little book by Bellador. It begins with a general description of tides. I must confess that the tides on this island seem to follow this explanation given in the book and not mine. Of course, I never studied tides, only in school where no one studied, and I described them in the initial chapters of this diary as they were just beginning to have some importance for me. When I lived on the hill, there were no threat. Although I found them interesting, I did not have the time to observe them in detail. There were other dangers to claim my attention then. According to Bellador, there are 2 spring tides each month at the time of the full moon and the new moon, and 2 neap tides during the first and third quarters of the moon. Sometimes a meteorological tide occurred a week after a spring tide, caused by strong winds and rainstorms. Surely that was what made me think mistakenly that the tides of greater magnitude occur once a week. Reason for the irregularity of the daily tides, according to Bellador, the tides rose 50 minutes later each day during the first quarter of the moon and 50 minutes earlier during the last quarter. But that theory is not completely applicable here. I believe that the rising of the tides must vary from 15 to 20 minutes each day. Of course, I have no measuring device at my disposal. Perhaps scientists will one day study these tides and make their findings available to the world. Then I shall understand them better. This month there was a number of higher tides. 2 of them were lunar and the others meteorological. The appearances and disappearances. The machines project the images. The power from the tides causes the machines to operate. After rather lengthy periods of low tides, there was a series of tides that came up to the mill in the lowlands. The machines began to run, and the eternal record started playing again where it had broken off. If Morel's speech was on the last night of the week, the first appearance must have occurred on the night of the 3rd day. Perhaps the absence of images during the long period before they first appeared was due to the change of the tides with the solar periods. The 2 suns and the 2 moons. Since the week is repeated through the year, some suns and moons do not coincide, and people complain of the cold when the weather on the island is warm, and swim in fetid water, and dance in a thicket, or during a storm. And if the whole island were submerged except for the machines and projectors, the images, the museum, and the island itself would still be visible. Perhaps the heat of the past few days has been so intense because the temperature of the day when the scene was photographed is superimposed on the present temperature. Trees and other plant life, the vegetation that was recorded by the machine is withered now. The plants that were not recorded, animals, flowers, grasses, and the new trees are luxuriant. The light switch did not work. The latches that were impossible to open, the stiff, immovable curtains. What I said before about the doors can be applied to the light switch and the latches. When the scene is projected, everything appears exactly as it was during the recording process. And the curtains are stiff for the reason. The person who turns out the light. The person who turns out the light in the room across from Faustine's is Morel. He comes in and stands by the bed for a moment. The reader will recall that I dreamed Faustine did this. It irks me to have confused Morel with Faustine. Charlie, imperfect ghosts. At first I could not find them. Now I believe I have found their records. But I shall not play them. They could easily shatter my equanimity and might even prove disastrous for my mental outlook. The Spaniards I saw in the pantry, they are Morel's servants. The underground room, the screen of mirrors. I heard Morel say that they are for visual and acoustical experiments. The French poetry that Stover recited. I jotted it down. Stover tells the old lady that it is Verlaine, and now there is nothing in my diary that has not been explained. Editor's note. The theory of superimposition of temperatures may not necessarily be false, but I believe that this is not the real reason. The author was on the island in spring. The eternal week was recorded in summer, and so while functioning, the machines reflect the temperature of summer. Second note. He neglected to explain one thing, the most incredible of all, the coexistent in one space of an object and its whole image. This fact suggests that the possibility that the world is made up exclusively of sensations. Almost everything, in fact, does have an explanation. The remaining chapters will hold no surprises. I should like to try to account for Morel's behavior.